Sorry to Bother You is certainly one of the best films of 2018. With its strange but compelling narrative supported by its equally interesting and endearing characters, Sorry to Bother You follows Cassius Green through a truly unique story critiquing a variety of aspects of modern American life, from capitalism and corporate structure to music and identity. But what may be the film's most overlooked element is its cinematography, undoubtedly some of the best of the year, and more specifically, its most noticeable and impactful cinematic element, at least to me, is its pretty subliminal but still spectacular use of color. Many of the scenes in Sorry to Bother You are drenched in solid, enveloping colors, most notably yellow, blue, and green. Scene after scene, these colors reappear, reinforce, and illustrate several of the themes the film also establishes through its characters and narrative. But what exactly do these colors represent, and how are they being used in the story?
Oh yeah! All right.
To start off, let's take a look at the first of the film's three main colors, yellow. We see yellow repeatedly throughout the film in both clear and subtle situations, but it is generally associated with specific circumstances, people, and areas. In the film, yellow is commonly associated with and represents the idea of advancement. We see the most overt example of this at the elevator to the power callers. Throughout the early parts of the film, the elevator is connected to many of the film's themes surrounding Cassius and many other characters' desires to move up the corporate ladder, to become wealthier and more powerful, an idea that is also repeatedly emphasized as admirable and highly sought after.
A power caller.
Where the callers are ballers. Where they make the real money.
As the film progresses, Cassius' desire and apparent need for money becomes more important, and he begins focusing more on money and power and less on his personal relationships. When Cassius finally gets promoted to power caller and enters the elevator, Diana, someone who had previously been in charge of Cassius, displays a new and uncomfortable level of attraction towards him, further reinforcing the idea that advancement, and in this case specifically, becoming a power caller, is positive and something that makes you more desirable to those around you, even if it may only be on a surface level. We see other examples of yellow showcasing advancement when Cassius successfully sells to a customer. It lights up in bright yellow, and the more sales he makes, the closer he gets to becoming a power caller. We also see yellow in the manager's office, in the drinks when the power callers make a toast, as well as inside Cassius's home. All of these examples further correlate the color yellow not only to the higher-ups in the company, but also to the idea of advancement and progress. These examples arrive at times when certain characters display a desire for improvement, partake in activities for advancement, or alongside people who are already high on the corporate ladder, further establishing the connection between yellow and the film's portrayals of advancement. Interestingly, I also drew a connection between the recurring color yellow and video games, because in many games, especially older ones, yellow, like the elevator to the power callers, is the color used to signal the next objective or a point of interest. Although Sorry to Bother You doesn't have much to do with the video game industry directly, the absurdity of its story creates a striking similarity between the film and many equally, if not more, ridiculous stories that video games often employ to address more profound themes that a more grounded story may not be capable of in the same way. Sometimes, telling a story through a more exaggerated and unrealistic lens can allow us to more clearly see the problems and ideas a piece of media is addressing, as well as the perspective it's taking.
The Equisapien Martin Luther King Jr., the one that we create.
Sorry to Bother You not only does just that, but does it exceptionally well. And, for me, the color yellow, in addition to its connection with advancement and corporate culture, also provides an admittedly subtle connection to the ideas of checkpoints and progress in video games, as well as a concession of its insane, but practically ridiculous story.
Oh yeah!
There's a bunch of us that are organizing to get us paid more, get some benefits.
Blue is another main color in Sorry to Bother You, and it may appear even more frequently than yellow. It was, however, much harder for me to understand what it represented. I initially thought it only indicated stagnation because many of the people who wore blue and many of the scenes and areas that featured blue opposed the ideas and people associated with yellow. The colors blue and yellow, which were realized through the characters and scenes that represented them, constantly conflicted with each other. For example, we see the strikers outside the building protest in blue uniforms, and their primary opposition are the higher-ups in the company, people who had been represented throughout the film by the color yellow. However, I now believe blue symbolizes several ideas simultaneously, but most notably, in addition to stagnation, it also represents a potentially already connected concept in the working class, which is often associated with, you guessed it, the color blue.
Fuck you! Fuck you! Fuck you!
To start off with blue's representation of the working class, though, we see the color throughout the film, usually alongside the lower level employees who have little influence and are under control of the higher ups, constantly looked down upon for their low income and seeming insignificance. Here, we see the office space with low-level employees inundated with blue, further establishing the connection between the workers and the color. In addition to the blue we see on the strikers outside that I mentioned earlier, which, to me, most overtly displays the connection to the working class and lower-level employees, Salvador and Squeeze often wear blue as well. These two characters directly oppose Cassius when he initially refuses to side with them, clearly revealing their positions in the war against worry-free, and their choices in clothing color help them act as a representation of the working class as a whole, further reinforcing the connection between not only themselves, but also the groups they identify with and blue. Both Squeeze and Salvador act as extensions of the frustrated working class, and we can assume that many, if not all, of their disagreements with Cassius would be shared by others in the group. While the color may seem insignificant, blue provides a visual that combines these similar ideas and subtly helps connect these characters. However, as I said earlier, I don't believe blue only signifies the working class and lower level employees. So, to give an example of blue's representation of stagnation, we see blue on the high school football team who can't move past the glory days.
Look at them. All they do is work at the home furniture store and play football all day. It's just like they're stuck or something.
Here, the film adds another layer to Blue's interpretation, and while it doesn't have quite the same impact as its other interpretation, it still has a profound effect on the meaning of the story. Throughout the early parts of the film, when we're introduced to Squeeze and the other workers at Worry Free, we learn about their plan to go on strike and realize that although they work in unsatisfactory conditions and with unjustified pay and benefits, they still want and take action to improve their circumstances. I know this may sound like a contradiction to stagnation, and in a way it is. But Blue's connection to stagnation isn't based on the workers' desires or intentions, but on the struggles to achieve those desires. Blue's connection to stagnation doesn't mean the employees don't try or want to move up in society or improve their conditions, because they clearly show that they do indeed want to change their poor working environment and increase their benefits, most clearly seen when they go on strike. Blue does, however, indicate the difficulty for low-level people to advance, to change their currently unsatisfied circumstances. The workers, who are also representative of other similarly oppressed or seemingly powerless groups, have to move discreetly when seeking change. Their continued status at the bottom of the corporate ladder and of having unjustified pay is not for lack of trying to improve, but rather a display of the sometimes overwhelming challenges for certain groups to move up in society in a capitalist system such as the one in Sorry to Bother You. The idea of the football players being stuck connects to people in lower positions in society almost solely through the color blue, which links these ideas and strengthens both of them by allowing the two seemingly disconnected concepts to support one another as the audience witnesses their experiences. Through the linking color blue, Cassius' comments about the football team can be extrapolated to the lower level employees and all that they represent, giving us further insight into the film's perspective on issues regarding the working class and the difficulty for oppressed, insignificant, or powerless groups and people to move up in society.
Is Cash Green?
Yeah, Cassius Green.
Cleverly, the main character's name, of course, is Cassius Green, a non-coincidental combination of yellow and blue, which, to me, only further reinforces Cassius' state of mind, his awkward in-between status in which he finds himself for most of the film. Much of the movie details the struggle Cassius faces when presented with and accepting opportunities that not only contradict his own previously impoverished lifestyle, but also bring him into conflict with the opinions and ideologies of those around him. I thought the film did well in presenting the separation between the various worlds in its story and connecting the controversial ideas about several societal issues to real life through the eyes of its main character Cassius, which allowed us to see both the causes and effects of greed, capitalism, betrayal, and integrity. Cash's perspective and experiences act as a sort of fulcrum that holds the film together and allows it to advance in the way it does. This approach, though, creates the character trapped and forced to choose between two vastly different worlds, a division reflected by his name since green is a combination of yellow and blue, the two colors that represent the film's two main positions. Similarly, Cassius's last name also represents pivotal ideas within the story, adding a third color that, alongside characters, dialogue, and other cinematic elements, further reinforces the film's themes. Perhaps even more clever, though, is that in addition to its symbolism, the main character's name is also a homonym for Cash is Green.
Is Cash Green?
Yeah, Cassius Green.
Cash's full name can be and is recontextualized with regards to money and places even more focus onto one of the film's driving forces. Just like Cassius is the center of the story, constantly pulled in different directions, many of the conflicts that arise in the film are centered around money and the morality of achieving and giving it away.
Because we make the profits and they don't share. If we're gonna give them our day, we need to have enough to cover our basic necessities.
Green becomes more significant as the story progresses, and throughout the last act of the film, the conflicts surrounding money and the divisions between the upper level and lower level employees not only become more apparent, but also more important. The green doors and green tent near Steve's office foreshadow the clash between the two main opposing groups which had been represented by yellow and blue. In this moment, Cassius learns about the almost comical but horrifying truth about the company, how they're turning people into equisapiens, which forces him to make an important moral decision about his position as a power caller and his standing in the growing divide between the lower level and upper level employees, further demonstrating both Cassius and the color green's connection to yellow, blue, and the ideas these colors represent. However, Cassius and the color green are not the only representations of divisions between the two opposing groups. Another example comes with the white person voice used by the black power callers. To briefly illustrate the somewhat oxymoronic nature of the black power callers, I thought it was funny that the white person voice didn't match the black person speaking it very well.
Well, man, I'm gonna have to get me some new suits.
Although this wasn't a use of color in itself, this non-synchronicity represented the divide between black people and white people, between employees and employers, between lower management and upper management. Oftentimes, these groups try and claim to be in sync with one another, to understand the other's problems and grievances, but ultimately, that divide always persists and adds further pressure on the other to conform to their own wishes. Sorry to Bother You uses color to further emphasize and reinforce the themes regarding capitalism, greed, betrayal, and money that it also establishes through its narrative and characters, especially through Cassius Green's choices and divided position, and whose name also represents the central conflict, not only within himself, but also of the film as a whole. By incorporating meaningful colors alongside the narrative and characters, Sorry to Bother You seamlessly establishes a connection between its strange and obscure story and its themes, which allowed me to more fully understand many of the positions the characters and the film itself took on the topics it addressed. However, as you may already know, film is odd, and coming from someone who often likes to look deeper into movies than simply the surface level of their narratives, I know not everything has 100 subliminal messages and hidden meanings. Sometimes things are simply what they seem, with little or no deeper understanding. However, I think if you do feel that some aspect of a film, whether it be its composition, narrative, dialogue, camera work, or whatever else, has more significance than simply its relative place in the story, you may not be reading too deeply into it. Perhaps there's something larger at play than the entertainment of the narrative alone, and despite what anyone else believes or interprets from the film, as long as you can explain and provide evidence as to why you believe this, I think it's fair game to extrapolate meaning and personal interpretations from these elements, regardless of whether others agree, even the creator in some cases. For this video specifically, you may think that what I've said is too complicated or unintentional or just downright ridiculous for what the film represents. And at first, I also thought I may be reading too much into it. But as the movie progressed, it became clear to me that the color selection was not only intentional, but deliberate and meant to convey specific ideas. I may, however, differ from the filmmakers themselves about the messages the film aimed to convey and reinforce through its colors. But even if I do, this video has been my interpretation of yellow, blue, and Cassius Green, the elaborate and meaningful colors in Sorry to Bother You. Thanks for watching.